You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
This is Johanna, the Austrian host.
And I'm Annie, the American host. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for listening to another episode of your favorite international podcast. We're so happy that you keep supporting us, that you subscribe to us on your podcast app or on YouTube. We do have the absolutely best listeners.
We really do. I mean, it sounds like pandering, but it's sincerely not. We have the best listeners, and many of them are in our Facebook group where we share pet pictures and house porn and so many memes. It's a nice place to be.
So many memes. So many memes.
And one thing that's actually been making the rounds lately that made us all laugh is there's a meme going around joking about how quicksand is just not as pervasive a threat as our childhood made us think it would be, right?
Mm.
And then we started to wonder, how often does quicksand kill people? And the answer is not never. It happens, kind of. But everyone's familiar with quicksand from the movies, right? So some of the most memorable quicksand scenes are the dry quicksand in Lawrence of Arabia, right? And, of course, The Princess Bride. And, fun fact, during the planning phase of the Apollo moon missions, there was actually a lot of concern about the possibility of dry quicksand being found on the moon. And the front legs of the lunar module had plates on the ends of them, like as their feet, for more surface tension in case it should encounter quicksand on the moon. They did not find any areas of dry quicksand. And in fact, while researching this episode, there are almost no examples of dry quicksand, where somebody just falls into a pile of sand. It doesn't quite happen that way in real life.
First of all, I have to apologize if you hear any noise. It's extremely windy today. Never happened before. I'm sitting here in my little Harry Potter-like cabinet, and I still can hear the wind and things smashing outside. So if you hear anything, that's the wind. Quicksand, yes, another example of a sort of quicksand-like situation that doesn't involve water are deaths that happen when other materials like corn or grain behave in a manner that reminds one of quicksand. But it isn't quicksand. These deaths are caused by grain entrapment or grain engulfment. And according to Wikipedia, quote, workers in the grain can become entrapped in 3 different ways. An apparently stable surface may in fact be a grain bridge over an area beneath which the grain has already settled. A vertical mass of grain settled against a wall may suddenly give way while being cleared. Moving grain will not support the weight of an average person. Once entrapment begins, it happens very quickly due to the suction-like action of the grain. Researchers in Germany found that an average person who has sunk into grain once it has stopped flowing can get out only as long as it has not reached the knee level. At waist level, assistance is required. Once the grain has reached the chest, a formal rescue effort must be undertaken. Half of all entrapment victims eventually become engulfed. A human body in grain takes seconds to sink, minutes to suffocate, and hours to locate and recover. Recovered bodies have shown signs of blunt force trauma from the impact of the grain. One victim was found to have a dislocated jaw. End quote. This is one of the very serious dangers of farming, and we rarely think about that. And I have a story. When my mom was little, she almost died in a grain silo. So she and her friends crawled into one, they have these little doors at the bottom, and I guess back then people were not too careful with these kind of things. And they were playing house in there, and all of a sudden they started to pour in the grain. And my mom said it became really dusty and really hard to see.
Oh,
and
wow.
The 2 made it out, but my mom says that she thinks they wouldn't have found her until next year, when the silo would have been emptied and cleaned.
Yeah.
It's really scary.
That's terrifying.
And one of my uncles was almost killed by a harvester because they used to play in the fields and make little huts. And he fell asleep, and all of his siblings went home for supper, and they just left him there. And he really just woke up last minute when he heard the harvesters.
No.
I don't know how all of them made it through
How
childhood.
did any of us?
They did really dangerous stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, farm dangers are just everywhere. Both of those things could have ended really badly. They were lucky.
Mm.
The Wikipedia article mentions how you can get like a grain bridge, and that's sort of what happened. There was a really tragic circumstance in 2017 when a farmer in England died after falling. He was on sort of one of these bridges. He was trying to clear the top of the grain and wasn't wearing a harness, and he became the victim of that quicksand-like effect that grain can have. And his family desperately tried to dig him out, but he wasn't wearing a harness when he fell, and they just couldn't reach him in time, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. This type of death is unfortunately somewhat common on farms, like far more common than I would have thought, with several deaths a year. Death in these cases is generally caused by asphyxiation, the pressure on your chest. You know, it's like you inhale, but then as you exhale, the grain moves closer to your chest and closer until you can't get enough air to keep you alive. So, yeah, it's surprising how often these accidents occurred to me and just how quickly you can be trapped. It's really sad. But now we're going to be discussing the very real wet quicksand that is the more serious threat and the thing that probably most of us think of, especially if you've seen The Never-Ending Story, which I've never seen and never will because, spoiler alert, the horse dies in quicksand. And of course, Blazing Saddles has a big quicksand scene, which is sort of mocking previous quicksand scenes. Mel Brooks, you know. I'm sure when we post this episode in the Facebook group, people will be weighing in on their favorite quicksand scenes. There are so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reason why there are so many quicksand scenes in movies that we remember as a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were at their peak in the 1960s with as many as 1 in 35 films featuring quicksand. Can you even imagine?
It's a lot of quicksand.
It's a lot of quicksand. In an article for Slate.com, Daniel Engber interviews Emmy-winning writer and executive producer Carlton Cuse, and he writes, quote, "Quicksand once offered filmmakers a simple recipe for excitement, a pool of water, thickened with oatmeal, sprinkled over the top with wine corks. It was, in its purest form, a plot device unburdened by character, motivation, or story. My God, we're sinking. Will we escape this life-threatening situation before time runs out? Those who weren't rescued simply vanished from the script. It's too late. He's gone." The alternative was no less random. Surviving quicksand has always required more serendipity than skill. Is that a lasso over there? A tendril from a banyan tree? Q throws up his hands and he thought, he's now quoted, "Adventure storytelling has to evolve," he says. "People use up gags. If you're working in an old genre, you have to figure out ways to make it fresh," end quote.
It's so true, isn't it? And I think that same article is the one that mentions how, for example, like going back before quicksand, we had the old plot device of being tied to railroad tracks in silent films, right? Like how many people were tied to railroad tracks back in the day? But yeah, my God, quicksand was such a pervasive thing in movies and TV growing up. What is quicksand exactly? Thank you to Kevin Bosner for his article on howstuffworks.com called How Quicksand Works. And quicksand can basically happen anywhere if the conditions are right and sand or gritty soil becomes saturated with water. It can happen anywhere, but is most often found around shorelines, so riverbanks, lake shores, seashores, beaches, swamps, marshes, that sort of thing. They're also found in areas where you have an underground spring in the area. And that last one I think is kind of the scariest because who knows where all those places are, right? You think maybe you're being safe by avoiding water areas. You think you're being safe by avoiding water, but then the water could be anywhere. So, surprise. The reason it's called quicksand is that the ground can change from being solid and able to support your weight with no problem at all to a non-Newtonian semi-liquid state that you can get stuck in very quickly. It happens quickly. The water reduces the friction in the sand, and that allows you to sink. But there isn't much warning that it could be a serious problem. So to quote Mr. Bosner, quote, "The next time you're at the beach, notice the difference in the sand as you stand on different parts of the beach that have varying levels of moisture. If you stand on the driest part of the beach, the sand holds you up just fine. The friction between the sand particles creates a stable surface to stand on. If you move closer to the water, you'll notice that the sand that is moderately wet is even more tightly packed than the dry sand. A moderate amount of water creates the capillary attraction that allows sand particles to clump together. This is what allows you to build sandcastles. But beach sand could easily become quicksand if enough water were thrust up through it. If an excessive amount of water flows through the sand, it forces the sand particles apart. This separation of particles causes the ground to loosen, and any mass on the sand will begin to sink through it. End quote. If you're in our Facebook group, you've probably seen videos I've posted of Opus running around on the Brewster Flats on Cape Cod, where I'm from. And I mentioned before, it's the kind of place where when the tide goes out, it goes all the way out. When you're walking out, you will find all of those kinds of sand. And there are areas where you'll suddenly sink, but only maybe to an ankle. You know, like you'll take a step and you're ankle deep and you just back right up and step in a different place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's a really good reminder and reason why you should always have a buddy with you anytime you go anywhere near water, really. And the other thing that's important to note is that should you find yourself sinking in quicksand, it's really important not to panic because as with most things, but particularly with quicksand, panicking can get you into really serious trouble even faster. If you're in a quicksand with water situation, it should be of some relief to know that the childhood images we have of, the hero, oh, he's in the water and the outstretched hand and he's disappearing and then he's gone, sucked under. And that's pretty much fiction. The human body is a lot more buoyant than quicksand, so taking a deep breath and relaxing is the key. And we will get into more specifics about what to do in quicksand a bit later. But first, we thought we'd read you a few of the old articles that we found when we were doing our research because they're amazing.
It's just like with the devil's snare in Harry Potter. Just relax.
Just relax.
Just relax.
Yeah.
Just chill. All right, what do we have? We have West Schuylkill Herald, Tower City, Pennsylvania. If I mispronounce it, I'm sorry. It's Schuyl Kill. On 20th September 1907, on page 3, they printed an article called, quote, Quicksand's Death Grip, Peoria, Illinois. Quicksand in the Illinois River caused the drowning of Charles McKennedy of Keeling, Wilson and William Stinger of Laken, Illinois. The bodies were found erect in the river, all three held firmly by the quicksand, which reached above the knees. It is thought that the men's boat was overturned and that they were exhausted by the quicksand in their attempt to wade to shore. The water was barely over their heads when they were found. Sad.
That's really sad. And also, can you imagine having a situation where your boat overturned? You're swimming for shore and you finally get to shore and then now you're caught in quicksand. It's like, ugh, that's awful. All right, this next one is my favorite, I think. This is from the semi-weekly New Era, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, August 20th, 1910. Also page 3. Page 3 is the page to go to if you are looking for quicksand.
Quicksand information.
Yeah. All right, quote, saved from quicksand. Frail little woman makes... This article kills me, sorry. Frail little woman makes herself a human chain in rescuing her husband. This is pretty amazing. All right. With every muscle and tendon strained to the breaking point, Mrs. Mary Barth of Jamaica, Long Island, Thursday helped her husband, James Barth, to wrench himself free from a quicksand that threatened to engulf him. Clinging to his wife and slowly climbing out inch by inch, working up from her ankle to her waist as she hung over him from the bough of a tree.
Jesus!
Right?
She wasn't that frail.
No. Barth finally managed to free himself from the sand that was sucking him to death. Exhibiting the strength of a giant during the trial, the heroic little woman collapsed when her husband finally wrenched himself free. Barth weighs over 200, while his wife is slight and frail. The couple ventured into a bog on the shore of Jamaica Bay while out on a walk looking for wild cherries. They found cherries aplenty, and Barth had a basket half full when he attempted to rejoin his wife and found he had sunk to his ankles in the soft mud, and that every effort to free himself only mired him deeper into the quicksand. Soon he had sunk to his knees. Calling to his wife, he told her of his danger, but warned her not to attempt to reach his side. Grasping an overhanging branch, Mrs. Barth edged herself carefully along until she hung at the very end of it. She was still some distance from her husband, but she swung back and forth until her feet were within reach of him. The strain of holding up her own weight was terrific, and as Barth caught her ankles, it seemed unbearable, but she dug her fingers into the branch while Barth pulled with all his strength and finally freed himself from the trap into which he had fallen. When he finally caught the limb and swung to firm ground, the wife dropped by his side, utterly exhausted. Her condition from nervous shock is serious. End quote.
If you see this in a movie, you would call it stupid.
Right?
This is amazing.
Did this really how? And I love that the lead headline is Frail Little Woman makes herself a human chain in rescuing her husband.
Must have been one nice husband.
I mean,
if you go through much trouble.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that woman frail. That's amazing.
All right, what do we have next? The Taylor Daily Press from Taylor, Texas, 19th of June, 1924. This time it's page 1. Quote, Quicksand draws men to death as family looks on. Man, why do you always get the great articles and I get the sad, depressing ones?
Do you want me to read this one and you can read the snarky one?
I'm kidding.
I'm sorry.
Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Remember we talked about Wilkes-Barre before.
That's right. Jack
the Snipper. They have Quicksand too. Jack the Snipper. June 19th. While his wife and children looked on helplessly, rescuers tried in vain to save Anthony Antonartis as he sank slowly in quicksand in the rear of his home at Swoyersville, 3 miles from here. For 2 hours, neighbors with shovels kept pace with him as his body was drawn into the sand. The best they could do was to keep his head free. As fast as the sand was taken out, he would sink lower. Finally, the quicksand covered his head, smothering him. Rescuers sank a wooden barricade around his body and it was removed. Physicians stood ready with pulmotors, but they could do nothing. End quote.
That's awful. It's so sad.
It is terrible. And if you're wondering what a pulmotor is, it was the first artificial breathing device where you could choose how much gas or air to give a patient, which is pretty awesome. It was especially popular in mining accidents and then gained popularity for victims of drowning and smoke inhalation. The first pulmotor was invented by the Träger Company of Lübeck, Germany in 1907.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and we have a picture of it that we'll share in the Facebook group, of course. But we have a follow-up to that article. It's an example of a letter to the editor in which someone weighs in judgmentally about a situation they know nothing about. And so this is the Montreal Star, Montreal, Quebec, Canada, 24th of June, 1924, page 10. Rescuing from Quicksand, the editor, Montreal Daily Star. Sir, a dispatch from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, to the Star of June 18th describes how a man sank to his death in quicksand while his wife and children looked on. Quote, for 2 hours, his neighbors with shovels kept pace with Antonartis as his body was drawn into the sand. The best they could do was keep his head free of the mire. Finally, the quicksand covered Antonartis' head, smothering him. End quote. Surely, there was time enough for the wife or for one of the children to fetch a rope from somewhere. One of the neighbors could have lassoed the sinking man around his waist or shoulders or thrown him a rope if his hands were free. Then, if the united strength of neighbors and family was not sufficient to pull him out, they could have fastened the rope to a horse or an automobile. It seems a pity that persons in accidents should lose their lives when a moment's thought could save them. Children in schools had better be taught what to do in both usual and in unusual emergencies. Then there will be some chance of people knowing what to do when they are grown up. Montreal, untrained nurse. So she's untrained, but clearly a nurse. So the untrained nurse thing sounded funny at first, like someone can just go, like, listen, I'm an untrained lawyer, but I don't think you should do it. It sounds bizarre, right? But it seems like this was a term used for women who had volunteered to act as caregivers, especially during the war, right? Today we would call them nurses' aid. So you'd have skilled or trained nurses and then untrained nurses who were volunteers who helped, who could still be of tremendous use, right? So shout out to all of the CNAs and other healthcare aides for everything you do, often the least glamorous, but some of the most vital care. And we appreciate you. But that particular untrained nurse was a little bit mean and judgy, I think.
I'd assume that the family and the neighbors tried all these kind of methods first before they started digging him out, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah,
that's just common sense. Of course, they would try to pull him out some other way, but okay.
Yeah, and a rope around the waist, you'll find out later, it's a bad idea. It's more likely to just break all your ribs or cause internal bleeding.
So let's discuss a few cases of people who have died as a result of quicksand more recently. On 30th of April 1997, around 5 p.m., 15-year-old Justice Carr and his 14-year-old friend Everett Hodgins went fishing, as they did pretty much every day. Fishing poles and live bait in hand, the boys were heading for the catfish living in the cooling lakes at the Braidwood nuclear plant, which was within easy walking distance of their homes. But by 8 p.m. that night, when the boys hadn't returned, Laura Shackelford, that was Everett's mother, knew something was very wrong. And according to comments she's made in many articles for the Chicago Tribune, she called the police, but they did not believe her and said that her son had probably run away from home. And so Everett's stepfather, whose name was Robert Wolfenbarger, along with other family and friends, they began searching for the boys. A state police helicopter joined the search on Friday. Tragically, the boys' bodies were found around 8 a.m. Saturday morning, on 3rd of May 1997. They were only a quarter mile, so less than half a kilometer from Justice's house, and you could even see the chimney of his house from where his body was found.
So sad.
They were found buried up to their waists. One of the boys was wearing a t-shirt and the other was wearing no shirt. There were claw marks all around the land around them, and I think probably what happened to the shirt is that one of them got caught and then maybe tried to use the shirt to pull the other one out and ended up both getting sucked in, maybe. Also, one of the boys had, quote, between 40 and 60 pounds of sand in his pockets and pants. This is so sad.
Yeah.
And initially, when the bodies were found, the family felt sure there was foul play, that they had been murdered and partly buried. Their fishing poles weren't found, after all. But when the police were called and went to examine the bodies of the boys, they also became stuck. And they needed to bring in earth-moving equipment, and it took 5 hours to remove the bodies of the 2 young men. As for the actual cause of death, though, no drugs or alcohol was found in the systems, and it was determined that one of the boys had drowned and the other had died of exposure.
Yeah, it was 59 degrees that day, and storms ended up moving in that evening with a low of only 34 degrees, which is 1 degree Celsius. And that's how cold it was early Thursday morning. And the winds were 20 miles an hour, so the wind chill factor was only 12 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 11 degrees Celsius. So it was freezing. The coroner determined that some of the sand and water found in their lungs may have occurred during the struggle to get out, and they may have passed out from a mix of hypothermia and exhaustion. And it does, like you said, it seems like one of the boys was stuck and the other became stuck trying to help. Joseph Tiber writes for the Chicago Tribune, quote, "Earlier, a spokesman for the department, Under Sheriff Keith Costelny, said the area where the boys were found was a combination of, quote, sand and mud similar to the texture of concrete with the same binding effect," end quote. Wolfenbarger said parts of the area were formerly swampy and were being filled in and excavated for a construction site. Quicksand is a condition in which loose sand is so saturated with water it behaves like a slurry and will not support heavy weights. August Koster von Groos, head of the geology department at the University of Illinois at Chicago, said quicksand may lurk under the surface at construction sites if the fill does not settle properly. Saying he was only speculating, Koster van Groos said the boys could have walked across the area thinking it was dry and firm, or that it contained only very shallow water on the surface. Quote, "It can look solid, but if you step on it, the disturbance can cause all these loosely packed grains to move and it liquefies," he said. "Suddenly, the solidness of the soil you expect is not there anymore, and when you try to get out, you lift one leg, but it moves more weight to the other," Koster van Groos said. "You struggle and get stuck. The sand then flows like water, and you sink. They could have just stepped on it, not knowing, or thinking it was very shallow water, Costa van Groos said. If caught in quicksand, he said, the advice is to lie on one's back immediately and work one leg at a time until you are out. But if you stand up straight and panic, you just sink, and heaven knows we've all seen those movies. If they fight it, they just sink down more and more. As a parent myself, this is just a nightmare. End quote. It's so sad.
It's so sad.
It's awful.
I can totally understand that the family thought it's foul play.
Yes, I can understand that too. And I think another reason that they thought that was where the boys were found was not on their usual walk home. And that's why it had taken so long to find them. Like they'd done a shortcut to get back. And in fact, the land they were found on was a vacant lot owned by a man named Donald Parrish. He was a blacktop contractor who would then be sued by the boys' families in a wrongful death lawsuit. They claimed that the only reason that the sand pit with the quicksand was there was because that he had been excavating the area without any legal permits or doing any of the necessary engineering studies on the land that you have to do before you just start digging, right? And they said that his illegal digging created the danger that had killed their sons. They weren't wrong. The landowner claimed that he had a no trespassing sign up and was in no way responsible, but his insurance did settle out of court with the two families, and they received about $600,000, I think, each family, which is not enough. No amount can replace someone you've lost, but it definitely, the good news is I don't know if it's good news, but it definitely wasn't foul play, though. I can, like you said, I get why the parents thought that it was, but like the police said, there were no footprints because there was mud all around as well that wasn't quicksand, right? And there was just nothing. There were no marks, drag marks, footprints, nothing. It was just a really horrific accident. Those poor boys, they're babies, really. The next really tragic story we have happened in January of 2012 when 33-year-old Nicola Raybone traveled with her best friend and her two children, aged 11 and 13, from their home in England to the island of Antigua, which is a beautiful Caribbean island in the Lesser Antilles. They had traveled there for her father's wedding. Her dad was getting remarried, everybody was celebrating, and they were staying at a beautiful resort on the west coast of the island. The day they arrived, a large group had met up to have a drink and catch up, and while the rest of the group left to go to dinner, Nicola said that she was going to stay and watch the sunset from the beach, but that she would meet up with them a little bit later. But she didn't show up, and they knew something had to be wrong. When they found her cell phone and sandals in the hotel bar, they really began to worry and started a frantic search. Eventually, and tragically, her body would be found close to the shoreline. She had become trapped in sand and had drowned when the tide came in. The surf had been particularly large that night, and it's really sad when you read the reports of this particular incident because her uncle was quoted as saying something like, he couldn't understand how this could happen, that his niece was such a strong swimmer. But that's the problem with quicksand. You're not drowned because you sink past your nose. You drown because you're held immobile and you can't move and the tide is coming in. The most terrible part of this story is the night that she went missing, the night this all happened, so many people heard someone screaming and crying and yelling for help. And they called the police, and people were trying to find the source of these cries, but they couldn't find it. They couldn't find her. So it's just devastating. Her family, of course, were gutted. And in a statement that was read at the inquest for her death, her relatives are quoted as having said, quote, "She loved her family so much and was so proud of her children. She was so happy when they were chosen as mascots for Blackpool Football Club in January 2010. She was involved in many charities and was never one to speak ill of others. She had just moved into a new house with her partner. They were looking forward to their future together. Everyone is shocked and devastated," end quote. And yeah, like with all of these cases, our sympathies go out to their loved ones because it's just awful. She was even studying criminology. She sounds like one of us, you know? I think that's the thing that's scary about quicksand, isn't it? You don't know where it could be, so it could happen to really anyone.
Yeah. It's so scary because, I mean, who suspects that somebody says, I'm just gonna take a little quick walk at the beach, I see you at dinner, and they never return?
No.
I mean, And not because anybody did something bad to them or because they had a horrible it's an accident, but it's not like they fell or something hit their head or, you know what I mean?
do.
They're just walking and all of a sudden they can't move anymore. It's so scary.
The scary thing too is the fact that there must not have been many people on the beach, and that would be very appealing to me, right? Like, ooh, there's no one on the beach. I'm going to go relax and enjoy it. But there was no one on the beach, so there was no one there to help. It's really sad. All right. Our third and final case comes from an article that was on mysanantonio.com by Kelsey Bradshaw. And this is what happened in this case. So on July 7th, 2015, just before 10 a.m., a missing persons report was issued for Jose Rey Escobedo. Jose was a 50-year-old man who really enjoyed swimming in the San Antonio River. It seems like there's not a lot on this case, but everything you read, it just seems like that's something he did pretty regularly. He'd just go down to the river and go for a swim. On July 8th, police received a call stating that a blue car was parked underneath the San Antonio River Bridge in Goliad County, and it had been there for several days. So police arrive and they take a look at the car and they find Jose's light blue sedan, and it's parked right where the caller said it was, and inside they find his glasses and his shoes. And the family were able to confirm that yes, this all did belong to Jose. So now they're worried because where is he without his glasses and shoes? On July 10th, the search was increased and a helicopter searched all along the river in the area where they believed he had gone missing, but nothing was found. The following day, on July 11th, game wardens were searching the river by boat, and that is when they found Jose's body. He was only about 350 yards upstream from where he had parked, and his body was found slumped over face first, and he was buried in quicksand from his feet to his buttocks, is how they describe it in the articles. So his lower body was just locked in there. On July 13th, his cause of death was determined to have been a result of drowning, although I did read earlier reports that indicated that exposure might have been another factor, like the heat. He may have passed out and gone face first into the water nearby, but to be clear, he didn't drown because he sank into the quicksand all the way. He died because he was trapped and couldn't get away, probably, I think, from a rising tide, which, in this case, there wasn't a tide, it was a river, but they had a lot of rain upstream, and so the river had higher than usual, I guess, heights. It's just so sad. It's so sad. Yeah. Sad and scary. And now you added another thing, or now we added another thing for me to worry. Yeah. Which, no, I'm not often in areas where that would happen. No. Thankfully. But it's good to know what to do if you find yourself in a quicksand situation, right? Mm-hmm. So, first, remove anything heavy on you, like a bag, a backpack, something like that. Take it off, toss it away from you, and you always keep your hands out of the sand while you do that. Then you try to take a step or two backwards to see if that helps loosen you up. But it's very important that you move slowly and steadily. If you slip out of your shoes, that's totally okay. It doesn't matter. Forget the fucking shoes. They are only going to increase the feeling of suction. Remember, don't panic. You're not actually being sucked down into the earth. That's not gonna happen. No, that's sinkholes. That's a topic for another day, which is also terrifying. Mm-hmm. If you can reach someone's hand or a branch or something like that, hold on to it. But it's very important, don't let anyone try and yank you free, because you could end up with all kinds of injuries, like a dislocated arm, for example. Try to wiggle your feet, allowing water to move into the space as you shift, which will help you to get free. You might notice feeling from when you're on the beach and your toes are in the sand. Just wiggle. Do it slowly. It takes about the same amount of force to get you out as it does a small car. If you can, try to sit or lay back so that your body is flat on the surface. Just think of it like what you would do on ice that's cracking. You have to distribute your weight, if it's possible. And then slowly try to break free. Yeah. We'll post a link. There's a link. We found a couple of interesting videos. There's one by National Geographic. I feel like everybody should watch these. It's compulsory. We're going to post them. You must watch them so that you know how to get out of quicksand, okay? There's one by National Geographic, and they're filming in England, and the presenter asks the Coast Guard rescue team that he's with for this demonstration. And so they take him out, and he he sinks and, the Coast Guard is there to rescue him. And he asks why they don't just rope off this area. And the man from the Coast Guard explains that, well, today, this is where the quicksand is. But there's no way to know where it might be tomorrow. So trying to warn, there's general warnings that there could be quicksand in the area, but they can't really rope off anything. And the National Geographic presenter also explains, because he gets buried, like up to the top of his legs, and he is clearly very uncomfortable and says it's painful. And he warns that it can also cause deep vein thrombosis, blood clots in your legs, right? The other one that we watched, there's one with Bear Grylls, and he's like in the desert. And my favorite thing is he gets out, he talks about how hard it is, and then he gets out, and he's like, now you want to take off all your clothes so you don't chafe. And he just takes off all his clothes.
He's so funny.
Yeah, chafing. No one wants chafing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that we end this one on a lighter note.
I would like that, yeah.
And we thought we'd end it with a couple of quicksand emergencies where people were actually rescued, and we can juggle a little bit about it, right?
Yes.
So the first one is from San Francisco, California, from the San Francisco Call. It's from 5th of September, 1913, that was a Friday, on page 4. And it says, quote, "Close call from quicksand death. Eel River nearly swallows Secretary of Oakland Commerce Chamber. A hairbreadth escape from death in quicksand is related by A.A. Dennison, Secretary of the Oakland Chamber of Commerce, who has just returned from his vacation on the Eel River. Dennison was in an automobile and tried to cross over what appeared to be a dry ford. When in the middle of the innocent-looking bed of the old stream, the machine started sinking. Dennison leaped out and himself started to go down. Both the machine and the men were rescued by persons on the bank. A second narrow escape occurred when Dennison's machine took a drop of 7 feet over a cliff the following day and alighted right side up." Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was the universe's way to tell him he needs a new car or to stop driving.
He's just a terrible driver.
He sounds like a reckless driver.
Yeah, he was really lucky, that man. If he was a cat, he'd only have one life left, honestly. And then the last one we want to leave you with is this very 80s article. This is from the San Bernardino County Sun, San Bernardino, California, April 18th, 1981, which was a Saturday. Page 14. "Quicksand, not a troll, lurking beneath bridge." By Mark Lundahl, Sun staff writer. Loma Linda. A 10-year-old's shortcut left him stuck in quicksand this week, and Loma Linda firemen were called to the rescue. And San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies who patrol the city have declared the area where he got into trouble off limits and will issue citations to anyone who tries to follow the same dangerous path. Eddie Stark, of Coloma Street, was returning home with 2 friends Monday when he decided to cut through San Timoteo Creek at Anderson and Cork Streets. As he started to cross under the Anderson Street Bridge, Eddie's foot sunk into a pool of soft sand and silt, and he could not pull it out. Eddie's 2 friends yanked on his leg, trying to free his foot, but the harder they tried, the deeper it sank. The friends ran to Eddie's home for help, and his mother, Betty, drove to the fire station about 3 p.m. to get a shovel or something, was her quote. She's like, yeah, listen, I just went to the fire department to get a shovel or something. People were so much less worried about, the welfare of children in the 80s. Captain Gene Brooks decided, quote, or something in the form of firemen would be better. Off to the bridge they went. They grabbed Eddie's leg and pulled and pulled. The sand's grip was stronger, and Eddie complained that the tug-of-war was too painful, Brooks said. The firemen then used a portable pump to suck out water around Eddie's foot, dug through the sand, and pulled him free. Brooks said he couldn't recall any previous quicksand rescues in Loma Linda. He said the sheriff's deputies will now cite anyone caught dangling their toes under the bridge, and Eddie's mother said, no more shortcuts. End quote. I really hope that Eddie is out there somewhere with a laminated copy of this article in his wallet for meeting people at bars.
It's a great conversation starter.
Yeah, right? The ultimate 80s kid experience. Eddie,
yeah,
are you listening? Call us, write us, tell us about it. I can't believe it. I love it.
I can't believe that the title did Quicksand, not a troll, lurking beneath.
Not a troll.
It's amazing.
It's good stuff.
That was our Quicksand episode.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I hope it cleared a little bit up.
I hope, it's funny because I went into it thinking quicksand just doesn't happen. It's just not really a thing.
Yeah.
But it does actually happen. It is a thing. And it's important to know how to get out of it, just in case.
Yeah, just in case.
Just
exactly.
in case. Yeah. Something good.
Something good. I have something good.
Yay.
Guess what I found today in our garden and in the woods while I was walking?
What?
The first primroses and the first snowdrops.
Oh, wow. You're way ahead of us.
So that means spring is coming. I know it's gonna get colder again and we have kind of like very stormy weather today, but I said it already like a couple of weeks ago. I can feel it. It's coming. And I'm so looking forward to it because I have this itch in my fingers to work in the garden.
That's
so
nice.
looking forward to that. What's your something good?
My something good is Paul and I are going on our first trip, just the two of us, since 2017. So I'm super, super excited about that.
So happy for you. You're going to enjoy the time.
I can't wait. It's going to be great. Yeah.
Awesome. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, first of all, please do us the favor and also subscribe to our podcast. Not only just, search for it every week. Subscribe to it. You're going to get notifications when our new episodes are coming, and it helps us. So just putting that out there. Also, please, if you subscribe, if you're already subscribed, if you don't want to subscribe, go and check on your podcast app if you can leave us a rating and or review, because that's also really important. And let's make 2022 the year of Fresh Hell growing even bigger.
That would be great.
What else? If you go to our webpage, which is freshhellpodcast.com, you find links to our Patreon, to our merch store, to our Facebook group, to our Instagram, to our P.O. box, to our email address. All the ways you can support us, reach us, talk to us, whatever, you're gonna find it there. If you want to know more about Patreon, you can also go to Patreon directly and type into the search bar, Fresh Hell, will pop right up. And that's it. The last thing I have to say is tell all your lovely, amazing, wonderful pets that we said hi, we miss them, and we want you to cuddle them. Give them a treat and say it's from Annie and Johanna, please. They deserve it.
Yeah, definitely.
Be also kind to your fellow human being at least once. Don't let them walk all over you, but hey, we're all having a rough time, right? So, that's it.
Just those 42 things. That's all. We don't ask for much. Thanks
the
again,
list is
everyone.
Getting longer and longer and longer.
So that's all. And until next week, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye-bye.